But I'm going to suggest we now move on to our next speaker, Rachel Stevenson, who is from the Croydon Archives, which is a sort of a kind of local government borough in London. But I'm probably getting that wrong, and Rachel can correct me. And she's going to talk about ingesting the born digital records of This Is Croydon, which is part of a wider initiative. But Rachel, are you happy to take over? I can see
Yeah.
your authoring slide there.
Yeah. 1 second.
That's it. Can see
Is that
your
okay
kickoff
now?
slide. Fantastic. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, great. So, hi everyone. My name is Rachel Stevenson, and I am the digital archivist at Croydon Archives in South London, which, yeah, like Michael said, is the archive for the London Borough of Croydon and Croydon Council. So, I'm going to be talking today about our experience of archiving the born digital records of Croydon's year as London Borough of Culture, which ran from 2023 to 2024. So I'm going to give quite a broad overview of the sort of whole process of archiving the born digital records of a large cultural infrastructure project like Borough of Culture, but I'll also go a bit more in depth into our ingest workflow as well. So just to give a bit of context about my role and how the archiving of London Borough of Culture came about, in April 2023, our borough archivist at Croydon Archives, Rosie Bizer, submitted a funding bid for the National Lottery Heritage Fund Dynamic Collections campaign. So this was a funding stream aimed at helping archives become more resilient and to bring to life the stories of people and communities across the UK. So she'd seen that Croydon's year as London Borough of Culture had already officially kicked off in March 2023, and that at that point there was no system in place to archive the records of this programme. So Croydon Archives also had no infrastructure or capacity to actually accept and preserve digital records. And so sort of seeing this as a wider opportunity to make improvements, the funding bid focused on the digital transformation of Croydon Archives, as well as the crucial need to archive the records of Croydon's Borough of Culture year. So the bid was successful, and in October 2023, Croydon Archives was awarded just under £250,000 to begin the digital transformation project. So this project began in January 2024, with the digital strand being led by the project digital archivist role, which was me. So the key objectives of the digital strand were to implement a new digital preservation system, strategy and workflows, to archive the records of Croydon's London Borough of Culture year, which is obviously what I'm talking about today, improving transfers of digital records from council departments to Croydon Archives, and setting up kiosks in our central library to allow the public to access our digital collections. So, what is London Borough of Culture and what do we want to achieve? So, the London Borough of Culture initiative was launched by the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, in 2017, and it gives London councils the opportunity to submit bids to receive over £1 million in funding to create a year-long programme of cultural activities that celebrate the unique character of the local people and places in their area. So, Croydon was awarded Borough of Culture in 2023 to 2024. So their programme became This Is Croydon, which was a year of music, theatre, dance, poetry, art, heritage, involving over 100 creative partners from across the borough. So, as I've said, our NLHF project only actually started in January 2024, with the Borough of Culture year ending in March 2024. So we needed to be able to ensure that this story of this historic year for Croydon was going to be comprehensively documented and made accessible for future generations. So following some early consultation meetings, we were told to expect a significant number of digital records. So from previous archivists, for example, that have been involved in their Borough of Culture years. So we had to both establish the capacity to accept, preserve and make accessible this significant digital collection, whilst simultaneously actually liaising with the creative partners that were involved to make sure we could actually locate and safely transfer these records. Yeah, because of that kind of setup, there have been no one sort of central process or location for storing This Is Croydon records. So council records were stored on SharePoint, and records created directly by delivery partners were held across whatever platforms they wanted to use, and saved in a variety of file formats that hadn't been sort of guided or overseen by the archives. Before we could even think about sort of ingesting any records, we had to make sure we'd set up safe and secure infrastructure to be able to accept and transfer the material. So the first thing we did was run a procurement exercise for a digital preservation system. We eventually procured Archivum in May 2024. We ultimately went for this because it fit with our budget, but also because of the functionality it had to integrate with both SharePoint, which is the main platform used by Croydon Council, and also Atom, which is what we use for our front-facing catalogue. We then established a digital preservation workstation in the archives office using a non-network PC so that we could process external transfers of digital records from things like hard drives or USBs that Borough of Culture delivery partners might have. We installed the National Archives file identification tool Droid and Terracopy onto the workstation and onto our laptops so that we could run reports over digital content and be able to transfer digital records from one location to another without changing metadata. We also purchased an external hard drive with over 2 terabytes of storage so that we could create and store backup copies of Borough of Culture digital records whilst we were still preparing them for ingest. And then we worked with our in-house IT team, Croydon Digital Service, on 2 things. Setting up the integration between the council's Microsoft 365 and our Atom catalogue, but also setting up a secure network drive where we could sort of temporarily store and manage digital records before they were ingested. So this is only accessible to a small number of archive staff, and it can be used to store these records from external sources. We didn't really want to use SharePoint because of how easy it is to sort of accidentally change metadata or alter the documents. And then finally, we updated our donation agreement so it was suitable for digital records transfers. This meant that people would have to fill in sections on technical information like file formats, size of transfers, and like where the records had originally been stored. So like I said, at the same time, it was really important that we started to reach out to groups and organisations that have been involved in Borough of Culture to start understanding the records that they had, where they were being stored, that kind of thing. So we sent out introductory comms and a survey to all delivery partners as a sort of information gathering exercise on what was out there, because we just didn't really know at this point. So it had questions on file formats, storage platforms, whether they had paper and digital records or just digital. And then that kind of helped us work out what transfer workflows we would need to establish. I also held lots of consultation sessions with delivery partners, and we attended the final few steering group meetings. And on a few occasions, actually went out to sort of in-person visits to different groups and organisations to look at their digital records. I can't stress enough, if anyone's doing anything like this, how important it was in this situation to sort of be a friendly face and really clearly explain what was needed. Not only were many of these delivery partners already under-resourced and pushed for time, but lots of them also had no idea what Croydon Archives was at the beginning of this process. It was really crucial that we sort of started with these introductions and established why it was important to document this year, rather than kind of just sending out an email asking people to do this work for us. And we also issued a 1-page guidance document as well, as alongside a sort of more in-depth guidance document. So the transfer workflows, we sort of created them for different types of transfer, with some of the most common ones being SharePoint. So because we were able to integrate SharePoint with our Archivum quite early on, we were able to process transfers as a separate process, rather than so basically we would prepare our metadata first and then ingest the records directly, rather than doing the transfer as a separate process. So we would wait until we were ready for ingest and then do that. Google Drive was probably the most commonly used platform by Borough of Culture delivery partners. So transfers of digital records from those were processed via installation of the Google Drive application onto our laptops, which then allow for the sync of the delivery partner's drive with our file explorer. So from there, we would run a pre-transfer Droid report over the files, copy them into our temporary network staging area, and then run a post-transfer Droid report. comparing the checksums to make sure nothing had been modified or corrupted during the transfer process. And then if a delivery partner had their records on an external hard drive or a USB, we would complete the transfer using the non-network digital preservation PC, also using Terracopy. And we had an area for quarantine of files as well on this PC if needed following a virus check. So all of these transfer workflows are written out in depth in our procedure documents. So please do get in touch if you want to know more step-by-step details about how we sort of processed each type of transfer from any one of these things. This is a bit more of an in-depth breakdown of our workflow. So sort of going back to the beginning, where possible, we would ask delivery partners to provide access to where they were storing their digital records. This would give us a bit of an opportunity to review what they had in the first instance. So it was mostly documents, Word, PDFs, PowerPoint, spreadsheets, but also there was a significant amount of photographs, video and audio files as well, sort of documenting events, performances, concerts, and that sort of thing. Over a period of time, we'd then work with the delivery partner to help them create listing templates and to sort of organise their digital records. So this could mean like moving files that weren't appropriate to be transferred, so more kind of routine documentation. We also asked them to document any copyright or access restrictions in their record sets. Had medium amounts of success with that, but yeah, I'll go into that nearer to the end. They then complete our donation agreement with the information required on the size of the transfer and file formats and that kind of thing. Then when we were ready for transfer, we would agree that method with the delivery partner based on where the records were being stored. They'd be transferred to our temporary network drive using Terracopy unless they were on SharePoint, in which case we would wait for the direct integration and do the ingest from there. We would then complete a virus scan and quarantine any records if needed and run the post-transfer Droid reports. We'd copy all files and metadata onto our external hard drive for backup and then go through the process to accession the records and update our digital asset register with the details of the new transfer. We then use Droid reports to complete any sort of technical issue resolution where this was needed. So we would check and weed out duplicates, investigate any unusual file formats that Droid might not have identified, and sort of contact the delivery partner if there were things like password protected files that we hadn't initially picked up on or anything like that. We'd then use a processor that Archivum custom built for us, which would create a metadata CSV in the exact format required for ingest into Archivum. So this is part of their processes. It's called an ARC file meta. That's the terminology that they use. And to do an ingest, you have to have created one of these CSV files. So using this processor, which I will talk about a bit more in the next slide, some data is automated by this kind of meta settings tab, and then other data is manually input using information that we'd already collected from listing templates. So once we prepared this metadata file, we'd ingest the content and the ARC file meta into Archivum. The system then undertakes virus checks and creates the archival information package. If this ingest step was successful, which in many cases it wasn't on the first try, the system then moves on to preservation actions like integrity checks and normalization where required. Based on the information included in the ARC file meta, it would then sort of push through the records and the descriptions to our ASM catalogue. And we had two different options for this. So there was an option for open records where it was just, it was both the record description and the copy of the record were uploaded to Atom. And then we also had an option for closed records where it was only the record description that was uploaded to Atom and not the actual preview of the digital record. And that was always go through in draft so we can then check that they all looked okay. So this is a screenshot of our processor that was kindly custom made by Archivum for us to be able to generate this CSV files. This was essential for us because manually creating the metadata for such a large set of records in the exact right format would have been incredibly time consuming and also likely subject to a lot of human error. So the processor looks like an Excel spreadsheet. And the way it works is that you upload your Droid report from the set of records that you're planning to ingest. You then navigate to this tab, which is where you can sort of amend as many fields as possible that you can sort of like mass add data to, or that can be created as a running number, like a reference code. So you can see there's like access condition statements, reproduction conditions, creator name. You've also got things like do not display folders in Atom. So you could say where you wanted a record to be, a folder of records to be closed, and it would make sure that the metadata was correct so that they didn't appear on the Atom catalog. So then once you'd finished editing the settings, you'd run the processor via the Excel developer tab, and it would produce a metadata spreadsheet based on the list of files in the Droid report. So I don't know how well you can see this, but it looks like this. You can't see the whole CSV file there. There's lots more columns, but it would add the creator. It would generate a running set of reference codes. It can also generate things like level of description. Yeah, and then you can manually edit it with anything that can't be automated by the processor. So for example, you can only add one access condition statement. So if you're ingesting a set of records where some are open and some are closed, you need to sort of amend some of the statements to make sure that they're accurate. But we completed this metadata process for every individual transfer of records from delivery partners, then for Croydon Council's records as well. So I think we created about 60 ARC file meta CSVs in total, some of which had sort of over 1,000 rows. So it was a lot. Once the metadata CSV was complete, we were ready to do ingest into Archivum. So I've just done a screenshot here of the Archivum system. So for records held in SharePoint, like I said, we had this direct integration. So you could see the exact contents of the site that you were ingesting from mapped here into the system. So this is our internal comms SharePoint. And you can just navigate to the right folder and, and ingest it alongside the metadata CSV. So for files not in SharePoint, we'd need to upload them to a secure Amazon AWS S3 location using WinSCP, which is like a file manager tool. And then they would also become visible via Archivum. And once ingest had been kicked off, the files would go through the process. So you can see here a screenshot of the system working through fixity checks for each file. And you have this sort of audit trail function where you can sort of literally watch as it goes through the process. So where are we now? All digital records have been pushed through to Atom with either a preview for records open to the public or just a catalogue record for closed records. The collection's ready to go live. It's just pending a final review of some of the council Borough of Culture files by senior management. The collection is comprehensive and broad range of over 22,000 documents, photographs, videos, and other creative outputs which tell the story of this moment in Croydon's history, from when it was initially awarded right up to the evaluation. We received records from over 50 delivery partners and collected all Borough of Culture records held centrally by the council. So they'll be available to search alongside a set of highlights pages and finding aids to help navigate the collection. And we've also set up digital kiosks in our central library as well, where people can access it. And this is great because we now have the sort of technology and workflows needed to preserve digital records that we didn't have before Borough of Culture. And we've learned a lot from it. So just to really quickly whiz through these. Challenges was that it was very difficult to set up digital preservation from scratch at the same time as having to sort of collect such a large digital collection. So in an ideal world, it would have been great if we could do that first and then move on to collecting the records. And finding a consistent approach to transfers when people were sort of storing things all over the place was also a big challenge. Copyright and data protection issues were also quite a big issue. It wasn't always documented particularly clearly when the records were created. So we had to do quite a lot of work with delivery partners to make sure we were processing the records appropriately. And a big one that we're still trying to sort of work on at the moment is how to promote and make it seem interesting to have a Born Digital collection online. So obviously it's very visual. We've got lots of photographs and things like that, but there's also a real sort of richness in the documents, and it's we're not quite sure yet how to really sort of make that promote it and get people engaged with it. Um, Lessons learned is basically a big one is just having archiving on the agenda right at the beginning when you find out that you're going to be doing or that your borough or area is going to be doing a process like this, because it could just mean so much, things could be so much more consistent, and then it makes the processes easier. And just some really obvious ones. Ingest workflows take a huge amount of trial and error, and it all took a lot longer than expected. So yeah, we definitely had some shifting deadlines along the way. But yeah, that's it really. If anyone's going to be working on the archiving of a program like Borough of Culture in the future and wants to know more or would want to have a quick chat, please do feel free to get in touch, because I feel like we sort of learned a lot from this experience. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And people have already jumped the gun and know that I'm going to give you a quick round of applause. And you said things take longer than expected, but you and Elizabeth have done a brilliant job of keeping to time. So thank you very much for that. I think we've got a couple of minutes to pick up some questions that have popped up in the chat. I'm going to suggest we kick off with one from Christopher, and it was also reflected by Lara, which is sort of how do you cope with sort of duplicate files if you're getting content from different sources and people may have chosen the same name for their files and stuff. How did you do that, and how did you also did you have to visually audit the image files that you were getting in to check that they were what they purported to be?
So for the first one, I guess if they were coming from different places, it was main and they had the same file names. I guess the way that we got around it was just in the cataloging of have each thing having a unique reference code, and that's reflected in the archiving system. So it wouldn't be that we kind of just had loads of duplicate file names without a reference code attached to it. And I was sort of processing each transfer separately, so that wasn't getting too muddled up, hopefully. Visually audit the image files. Is that kind of, I guess, to check whether they were what they said they were, or
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we simply didn't have the capacity to do that for everything. But we did quite a lot of sort of spot checks on things, particularly for like personal data and stuff like that. So um yeah, I guess it was kind of doing what we could, just hoping for the best, basically. But we've got quite a lot of. We spoke a lot to our data protection officer in the council about, like, because obviously it's lots and lots of photographs of individuals, of people, and we feel like we've got quite good assurance on that because most things were like at public events and that kind of thing, it'll be okay. And we've got quite a sort of robust takedown policy as well, that if anyone was to sort of query something on there, we would take it down and investigate it.
Okay. There's a couple more interesting ones in the chat, which I'm going to suggest you might want to sort of have a quick read through and respond there, if that's okay, Rachel. I guess the last, I'm going to say it's quick, but maybe it isn't, was Adrian asked about where do you get your fixed checks from? Are you comparing it with sort of as the file sits on SharePoint or Google Drive, or is it only once you've sort of transferred it into your kind of custody, do you create a fixed check at that point?
So we would run, if at all possible, we were running Droid reports before we transferred them into our sort of custody, which would generate like checksum there. And then we would compare that we would run one like immediately after the transfer as well. And then I think Archivum also, because it's using the Droid report, it will then generate its own checksum and compare that with the Droid report from the metadata, and then it will. So, but yeah, ideally from the original one where it was before we transferred. Yeah.
Okie dokie.